Hello, this is Lady X. Please like and subscribe, and my stories will thrive. Welcome to another video by the Blue Tongues of Hell for some more Hyldr Chronicles. This chapter is called the Gothi Bonfire. The pink moon was full to the gunnels, nesting low over the Nibelungen mountains. It was so large, the villagers of Helheim said the sun must have laid an egg, a foreboding threat. They were also worried that the despised Gothi would be so overexcited about the oversized moon that they would invite themselves into town to wreak more havoc. After many moons of carving, hammering and sculpting near Elvarga River, Asmund and Hedil had finally completed the burial boat. Bees were giddily bustling through the white hawthorn and pink crabapple blossom, and few patches of snow remained over the plains. The two former enemies rode in custom silence, but exchanged a quick glance as they used the rope bridges of Odin's Eye to cross the torrential flow of Elvarga River. Eleonora and Ogni's official burial would take place when Hilda returned, if she ever did. Until then, Asmund continued to live amongst the Helheimers with Kyōko. He had almost grown used to the sickly white moon castle, but still longed for his sister to show up so they could ride home together with Kyōko. Kyōko still turned heads in Helheim, although nobody had thought of sending her off to a dungeon yet, chaining her to a rock or hanging her from the castle walls. People were too busy enjoying another day of peace and quiet without having to worry about their belligerent neighbours. The war was over. The blackouts and nightmares had stopped, and springtime was healing their wounds. Most villagers within the lead-white walls still felt mildly sick for some reason, but didn't blame the eastern newcomer. The reason they didn't roast her on a spit or duly gut her in the town square was mainly because most Helheimers had felt the same way for decades. For generations, it was considered natural to have mood swings, cracking headaches, or sore limbs. Some children didn't grow as tall and strong as Muspelheimers and Vanaheimers, and this was why their enemies sometimes called them dwarves. That didn't bother Helheimers, who deemed their small folk and low birth rates a blessing in winter when the food was scarce. Besides the frequent stillbirths and miscarriages, Kyōko thought that her hosts still kept their spirits high. They had been most welcoming, up till now. For the sake of some religious intrusion that was expected during the day, she had been confined to Astrid's room. They had firmly encouraged her to stay there, if she valued her own life. Astrid's close circle of friends chose to avoid the incivilities and inconveniences of a Gothi visit, and joined Kyōko to share weaving tips and toothsome tattle. Besides her tailoring talents, the talk of her unusual cooking had arrived to royal ears, and Kyōko had been invited to cook for the king and queen a few times. Her savoury fish dishes were now expected on a certain day of the week to please the ruler of Helheim Island, or the Isle of Helheim, as King Jarl preferred to call it. A parade of white-robed priests marched through the early night towards the gates of Helheim. They sang a gloomy mantra of money and soul, probably due to fatigue from the long trip down from Moonstone Hills, and surely from the burden of having to cleanse the world wherever they went. Under the glorious full moon, bathed in Sol's exceptionally bright sun rays, several half-Gothi ministers had joined the procession, leading the way with an arrowhead of yolk-yellow garments. A bell rang out in the distance, assumedly to welcome the prestigious holy guests. King Radgrid, in his buttery disguise, wasn't too concerned, and kept up the dismal singing. Money and soul, money and soul. When they arrived at the gates of Helheim, Radgrid's crew of disguised Gothi priests caught their breath and waited for someone to let them through. Muffled dog barks broke the long silence, and a few cackling hens tiptoed around their feet. Radgrid gripped his sword under the ropes. "Be patient," he whispered. "They won't know what hit them. A few last verses to get the gates open. With a bit of spirit this time." They chanted money and soul 9 more times, and after another awkward silence, the gates creaked and slowly grinded upwards. The Muspelheim assassins advanced along a stone-walled corridor towards an archway leading into town. They resumed the mortuary choir and prepared themselves to strike. Money and chains and all code. A white portcullis slammed shut before them. The priests ceased their lamentations, but didn't draw their weapons. From above the archway, a woman's voice lashed out. "Dear uninvited guests of Moonstone Hills, this will be your last visit, I am afraid." King Radgrid felt an icy drop of sweat run down his back. He knew who was speaking to them. Queen Asgard stepped up onto one of the embrasures in the parapet above them, and the full moon painted her grey features pale blue. "Our hospitality has its limits, and our faith will not be taken hostage by leeches and slimy con artists. Farewell, and may your melting snowball mugs never return." Asgard didn't hear the desperate "Wait!" from King Radgrid, and signalled her men to raise the crucibles. An orange glow appeared over the surrounding walls, and crimson-faced guards poured molten lead and iron over the edges until all was blinded. A flurry of arrows bit into the procession, and a spear cracked through the neck of a half-Gothi priest in front of King Radgrid. How could they have known? The baffled king ordered his men to retreat. His own concealed archers fought back, picking out sentinels on the parapets. But the screams of terror and melting flesh and bones impaired their accuracy. With a blast of horns and clashing shields, Helheim's cavalry came out of hiding behind the castle walls. They crossed the moonlit meadows and ploughed through the main entrance. Every last Gothi trying to run away was put to death, and King Jarl took great pleasure in crushing the skulls of burning and butchered Gothi ministers. He was still unaware that one of the pasty faces, bespeckled in blood and molten lead, was the defeated King Radgrid. Queen Asgard strutted along the passageway to admire the result of her planned ambush on the foul Gothi priests. She was sickened to see how the blue rays of the moon embellished their slaughtered bodies, to the extent that some of the crushed priests appeared to be blessed with moonlit beatitude. She stepped over one of the honey-robed men and spat in his face, only to feel a jolt of horror when she recognized him. Radgrid, how could this be? What were you doing here?
What is it, my dear?
Asked King Jarl, wiping his hammer on the white cloth of a headless victim.
You don't seem pleased.
Jarl brought his death hammer crushing down on another head and looked for another annoying priest to finish off. Queen Asgard held back her tears and kissed 2 fingers that she placed on the lips of the Muspelheim leader she intimately knew, more than she should have. It's nothing, Jarl. Just glad to be rid of them.
And so you should be. This was your wonderful idea. Should have done this years ago.
Make sure you have them dragged into the courtyard and burned.
Tonight we shall show these fools how to really praise body and soul. We'll make a bonfire of bones the moon will never forget.
No one will dare step on our toes. Ever again, whispered Asgard, remembering tender moments by the sea with her dead lover, dancing to the sound of seagulls and crashing waves, tripping over each other's feet, tangled in seaweed, falling onto the warm sand. Were you here to kill me, Rotgrid? During the night, a sinister mist crept into Helheim. Moist sheets of lace gradually soaked the rejoiceful villagers in a sudden deformed reality. The strange fog masked the enormous Gothi Bonfire raging in the courtyard, giving it a lugubrious shape. A glowing monster lashing out with tongues within tongues at the stars above. Before the mist arrived, Astrid forced Kyōko to dance with her around the sizzling Gothi breeze. Kyōko was shocked at first by the morbid pile of scorched skeletons. Then, as she glided through the alternate currents of warm moonlit smoke and the soothing sea breeze, she felt slightly giddy. They wouldn't admit it, but both of them felt a wicked pleasure dancing together round the roasting human meat. They laughed and spun in circles, intoxicated by Astrid's beverages and the exciting blend of spells and music. Asmund was leaning against the wall and watched them make fools of themselves. When he saw how light-hearted Kyōko was in Astrid's arms, his blood began to boil. Smoke stung his eyes as he walked towards the two maidens, singing to the tunes that a group of drunken musicians were improvising. A veil of mist suddenly hid the girls' intoxicated smiles, and Asmund had trouble following them. The surreptitious mist was now thick as soup, and it was impossible to tell who was who. Asmund spotted the dancing couple and lost his mind when he saw them kissing. He tried to grab Kyōko's hand to pull her away from Astrid, but his fingers touched something burning hot instead. He grimaced and let go while the swaying shadows twirled away into the fog. He bellowed into the pungent clouds of smoke and mist, but to no avail. With his back to the phantasmagorical bonfire, Asmund called out to Kyōko in mixed anger and growing concern. That was precisely when oily phalanges gripped his hair from behind and yanked him to his knees. Amber silhouettes staggered through the fog, and Asmund heard screams from all around the courtyard. He felt his head being pulled backwards, and he saw the upside-down face of a burning priest coming back to life. The man's mouldering skin was regenerating. His liquid eyes and brain trickled back into a shattered skull, gluing itself back together. And when Asmund found the courage to break free, the undead priest dug his teeth into the young man's throat and spat out a morsel of his windpipe. Queen Asgard was sitting with Njal at a long table facing the courtyard. You know how much I despise those Gothic goons. But don't you think the celebrating has perhaps gotten out of control, my husband?
I don't know, my queen. I can't see a bloody thing through this broth,
replied King Njal, finishing another Rorok's horn of ale. Asgard got up to see what the ruction was about. She wandered into the mist, with the left hand ready to draw her Skofnung dagger, just in case. Something was off. She could feel it. The random screaming grew louder. She suddenly noticed strange glimmering shadows lumbering out of the flames. In the midst of all the commotion, Asgard set eyes on a man walking up to her. The mist was thickening out. She could swear the person's mangled head was twisting into shape as he drew nearer. Everything around her fell quiet. Asgard ignored the resurrected priests, ripping her people apart like cannibals. She didn't hear Astrid crying for help as she was being tossed into the bonfire. Neither did she witness an undead Gothi ram a burning pike into Bjorn's chest. All she could see was a gaunt King Radgrid staring into her eyes.
I got your falcon, milady. Didn't get the one about how I was going to die.
Radgrid, you fool. How was I to know you, of all people, would dress up as a moonstone creep and try to slit our necks in our sleep?
Too late for regrets, I'm afraid,
said King Radgrid, giving Asgard a deep kiss. Asgard melted in Radgrid's sweltering arms. Her lost lover felt like he'd been forged out of molten rock, and she couldn't find the strength to push him away. He tasted of soot, molten bones and blood, but suddenly nothing seemed to matter anymore. until she felt a bolt of lightning pierce her liver. A wave of mist slipped away and revealed the two lovers in each other's arms. King Jarl couldn't believe his eyes and almost fell off his chair. By the time he found his hammer, Asgard was already dead, sprawled over the floor in her own blood. King Jarl's eyes blazed with ire, and he threw his death hammer at Radgrid, who grabbed it in midair with one hand. King Radgrid's clothes and weapons were now restored, and his belt had blessed him with a sense of unstoppable power. He used the hammer to flog a few Helheimer guards trying to apprehend him. He sent it crashing into the old dragon statue behind King Jarl. One of the heavy dragon heads fell and smashed the oak wood table below. The two kings yelled to the heavens and threw themselves at each other, all fist and fury. With her back to the town well, Kyōko was fighting off two enraged Muspelheiners, tearing at her clothes. Edil heard her cries and pulled his blade out of the priest's belly. He watched in horror as the fuming corpse's skin and hair grew back. The wound he had just inflicted on his enemy instantly healed, and the priest clawed at his legs like a frenzied ferret. Without wasting time, Hyldr swung his sword again and lopped the man's head off. It was already sliding back to its body like a snail, while Eddie was running towards the well. The savage attackers there were leaning over the stone wall, trying to grab Kyōko's legs as she tumbled over the edge out of sight. The two Muspelheimers were nothing but a pile of meat when Hedil had finished with them. He breathed out deeply with a hoarse growl and stretched his grey arms, admiring his long scarlet claws shimmering in the moonlight. Edil rushed back to the courtyard battle to save his parents. Although the mist had dissipated, a western wind blew heavy clouds of smoke through the men and women fighting for their lives. Some thrashed their enemies with whatever they could get their hands on. Knives, forks, torches, or aurochs horns. Others who still had their weapons did all they could to repress the Pharaoh priests, losing nails and teeth as they scratched and gnashed through the Helheimers. Edil plowed through his enemies. Occasionally he lost control and sank his sharp canine teeth into a juicy neck or venous thigh, sucking the warm blood out as he focused on his next victim. The mildly quenched bloodthirst cooled his mind for a while, and he briefly looked up at the vibrant moon, flooding his veins in waves of raw energy. Edil thought he could hear the island's heartbeat. Or was it Hyldr, the spirit of Nebelwood, calling him? Then he noticed a bloody wooden pike sticking out of his chest. He felt no pain, but the singed pole had cracked his ribs and punctured his heart. Blood poured from Edil's jaws. And then he saw his mother and father lying on the cobbled ground, as if torn apart by wolves. He gazed at his claws in disgust and watched them disappear as darkness replaced the red night. See you soon for the next chapter of the Hyldr